cause you to feel differently?
Not sure what he said. I'll tell you how I feel, and then Senator Paul is going to share how he feels. We just left the briefing, and we were talking about Iran. I want to state at the outset, I support President Trump. I support and respect the manner in which he has approached his commander-in-chief powers. I believe that more than any other president in my lifetime, President Trump has shown a lot of restraint. He's been reluctant to get us involved in wars all over the globe. He's been very mindful and respectful of the fact that when the American people are asked to give up blood and treasure, they're sending off their sons and their daughters, their moms and their dads into battlefield. And he's therefore very careful about it. I respect that enormously. My comments at the moment are not directed toward the attack that occurred on Friday. We'll leave that to another day. I will say that we were brought into this briefing today to talk to us about that attack on Friday. I had hoped and expected to receive more information outlining the legal, factual, and moral justification for the attack. I was left somewhat unsatisfied on that front. The briefing lasted only 75 minutes, whereupon our briefers left. This, however, is not the biggest problem I have with the briefing, which I would add was probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate. What I found so distressing about that briefing was that one of the messages we received from the briefers was, do not debate, do not discuss the issue of the appropriateness of further military intervention against Iran. And that if you do, you'll be emboldening Iran. The implication being that we would somehow be making America less safe by having a debate or a discussion about the appropriateness of further military involvement against the government of Iran. Now, I find this insulting and demeaning, not personally, but to the office that each of the 100 senators in this building happens to hold. I find it insulting and I find it demeaning to the Constitution of the United States, to which we've all sworn an oath. It is, after all, the prerogative of the legislative branch to declare war. Article 1, Section 8 makes that very clear. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist Number 69 made clear that this was a sharp contrast from the form of government that we had prior to the Revolution. A form of government in which the executive, the king, had the power to take us to war. He did not need the parliament to weigh in on it, to support it. That was the parliament's job after the fact, after we had gone into war. This, Hamilton explained in Federalist 69, is exactly the reason why this power was put in Article 1, Section 8, in the branch of government most accountable to the people at the most regular intervals. When we send our brave soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines into harm's way, we owe the American people the decent courtesy to follow the Constitution, to debate and discuss these actions. For them to tell us that either through a War Powers Act resolution or otherwise, for us to debate and discuss these things on the Senate floor would somehow weaken the American cause and embolden Iran in any other actions, I find very insulting. Now look, I hope that they'll come back and they'll say, no, you misunderstood us. We didn't say that at all. I wish I could believe that. I will note that when those words were uttered, not one of the briefers stood in objection. Not one of the briefers pushed back on that and said, we want to make clear that this is still the constitutional prerogative of Congress. I also want to make clear that I walked into that briefing undecided as to whether to support the resolution under the War Powers Act introduced by Senator Kaine. Now, Senator Kaine and I have had some discussions. I've got some concerns with some of the language, particularly in some of the whereas clauses that he's introduced. He's agreed to make some changes. And I can say that after that briefing is what changed my mind. That briefing is what brought me on board, together with the amendments that Senator Kaine has agreed to make. I'm now going to support it. I walked into the briefing undecided. I walked out decided, specifically because of what happened in that briefing. It is not acceptable for officials within the executive branch of government, I don't care whether they're with the CIA, with the Department of Defense, or otherwise, to come in and tell us that we can't debate and discuss the appropriateness of military intervention against Iran. It's un-American. It's unconstitutional, and it's wrong. And I hope and expect that they will show greater deference to their own limited power in the future, and to the power that belongs to Congress. This is not about us. It's not about any one of us. This is about our fidelity to those we represent. These powers are not ours. They don't belong to any of us. But when we allow them to be exercised through the wrong branches of government, with the wrong process, when you don't have debate and discussion, you don't allow the process itself to correct itself for the American people who will be most affected by these decisions to weigh in. That was insulting. That was demeaning to the process ordained by the Constitution, and I find it completely unacceptable. On that basis, I've decided to support Senator Kane's resolution, subject to the minor amendments that he and I discussed earlier today. Senator Paul.
Thank you. I joined Senator Lee in making the decision to also support the War Powers resolution. I wanted to hear the intelligence first. What I hear was less than satisfying, but one of the arguments that's been bandied about in public, I think, is particularly insulting to logic, the Constitution, and the intent of our founding fathers. The argument has been made that the use of authorization of force voted on in 2002 to go to war with Saddam Hussein and his government is justification for anything they want to do in Iraq today, including killing an Iranian general. I see no way in the world you could logically argue that an authorization to have war with Saddam Hussein has anything to do with having war with people currently in Iraq. I think we need to have a debate about the separation of powers. I, too, am a supporter of the president. I consider myself to be a friend of the president. I think the president's instincts on trying to show restraint and keep us out of war are good. I frankly think he will not unnecessarily escalate things. However, the debate is bigger than just this debate. The debate is a 70-year-long debate that began in 1950 with Korea and Truman. This is a debate, and many have written that Congress has abdicated their duty. Today, this is Senator Lee and I stepping up and saying we are not abdicating our duty. Our duty under the Constitution is for us to debate when we go to war, and we, for one, are not going to abdicate that duty. We'll be happy to take questions.
You guys, I know there's very little you can say about the details, but could you give us a better sense of who exactly was saying this to you, that you should debate this? Was it all of them? Was it a specific cabinet member or agency director?
You know, before I comment on that publicly, I'd really like to have a conversation with the president so I can make him aware of what we were told and by whom. But I will say that the messages we received didn't get any pushback internally from the briefers. What we were told over and over again was, look, this action was necessary. This was a bad guy. We had to do it. And we can't have division. We can't have dissension within our ranks, within our government, or else it sends the wrong signal to the Iranians. And I think that's completely wrong. They were asked repeatedly, what, if anything, would trigger the need for the administration to come back to Congress for a declaration of war or an authorization for the use of military force. At one point, I believe one of the briefers said something along the lines of, I'm sure we could think of something. But they struggled to identify anything. They were asked specifically, well, what about if you concluded, well, it's not my point to get into that here. I don't want to accidentally say anything classified. My point is, they were asked a number of hypotheticals about situations in which they might have to appropriately come and ask for authorization for Congress. Not once did they say, yes, we'd need to do it in that circumstance. At one point, one of the briefers said something like, don't worry, we'll consult you. Well, with history as our guide, consultation isn't necessarily the same thing as authorization for the use of military force. A declaration of war or an AUMF is what the Constitution requires, and drive-by notification or after-the-fact lame briefings like the one we just received aren't adequate.
Do you think the president should have carried out this attack against Soleimani?
Look, I'm still agnostic as to that, Manu. I still haven't had the questions answered that I came into that briefing expecting to ask. They left after 75 minutes. Now, I understand these are busy people. They've got a lot of demands on their time. They're appearing before a coordinate branch of government responsible for their funding, for their confirmation, for any approval of any military action they might undertake. And they had to leave after 75 minutes while they're in the process of telling us that we need to be good little boys and girls and run along and not debate this in public. I find that absolutely insane. I think it's unacceptable. And so I don't know what they had in mind. I went in there hoping to get more specifics as far as the factual, legal, moral justification for what they did. I'm still undecided on that issue, in part because we never got to the details. Every time we got close, they'd say, well, we can't discuss that here because it's really sensitive. We're in a skiff. We're in a secure underground bunker where all electronic devices have to be checked at the door, and they still refuse to tell us. I find that really upsetting.
Did you get a sense that they were not taking it seriously, almost like they didn't want to be there?
No, look, the fact that they were here shows they were taking it seriously. But some of the underlying questions did not appear to be taken seriously by some of them in some of what they told us.
Who did most of the talking on their side? Was it mostly Secretary Pompeo?
No, I would say there was, the time was pretty evenly distributed between the briefers.
So Pompeo is a former member of the House. Do you think he no longer respects members of Congress?
I'm not going to speak as to the subjective mindset of any of the briefers, as to whether they respect us or not. I know only that I came in there with a lot of questions, and that when I left, those questions remained unanswered. And I walked out of there not only without answers to all the questions that I had, but having been told that we shouldn't debate this too much because it might be harmful.
Have either of you read the House Democratic War Powers resolution that's going to be brought up for a vote tomorrow?
I haven't read that. I've read Senator Kane's resolution.
Welcome the debate, at least, if they send something over.
Sure. Look, after today, every time they pull a stunt like this, I'm willing to consider and introduce any and every War Powers Act resolution.
Senator Paul, you mentioned that they used the justification of the Iraq AUMF. So if they were they basically arguing that because the strike took place on Iraqi soil that covered
I don't want to discuss anything they said in there. The only reason I mentioned that is it's been in the newspaper also. I think it was Blair, the National Security Advisor, argues that 2002, the authorization to go to war with Saddam Hussein authorizes them to do whatever they want. So they have justified the killing of an Iranian general as being something that Congress gave them permission to do in 2002. That is absurd. That's an insult. And every time someone writes that Congress needs to take back their authority on war, that's what we're here to do. Let's have the debate, and let's have some senators stand up, and let's see if we can really truly have a debate over who has the power to declare war. The reason it was put in and why every founding father said they were taking power away from the president is because they didn't want perpetual war. The president says he doesn't want endless war. Well, the way you have less war is by having less troops in the Middle East and also by having a more fulsome debate about when we go to war.
Is the president being ill-served by this national security team?
I'm not prepared to say that. I'm telling you only this administration was ill-served by this briefing today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
What do you think?